In this IR forum, I talked to Dr. Daniel Pinkston of Troy University about tensions between Japan and South Korea.
Well, for Japan, it's a very complex relationship, with different actors in the region, both friends and foes, adversaries. And so it's very complicated in South Korea because Korea had been a Japanese colony from 1905 to 1945. There's a lot of historical animosity and I guess resentment from the Koreans, both North and South. The Republic of Korea and Japan signed a treaty in 1965 that normalized relations and settled all historical disputes. So by treaty and by the letter of the law, it settled all of those disputes. But the South Koreans say that South Korea was not a democracy at that time. It was under military dictatorship. And so they didn't really have the opportunity to ratify that in the way that a democracy would. So some people view it as illegitimate in some ways. But on the other hand, Japan has issued all of these apologies and formal apologies and everything else. But they've done so much and gotten so close. And this is just my personal feeling that they haven't quite gotten there. There's a kind of feeling of, and I think this gets to the cultural orientation, this kind of collectivist identity from the Japanese. So if you were to admit that your ancestors or your grandfather was a Class A war criminal or participated in the war, was part of the colonial occupation here in South Korea, that's very, very difficult because in that kind of culture and that kind of society, it reflects on your own personal identity. In a very individualistic society, what your grandfather did or your great-grandfather did is kind of irrelevant, right? You just kind of shrug your shoulders. Yeah, well, my grandfather was a bad guy. He was a dictator or he was a mass murderer or whatever, but that has nothing to do with me, right? But in these East Asian societies, there's more of a kind of guilt or shame associated with that. So it's better just to ride it out and run out the clock, which for the South Koreans, it's very frustrating. It's very, very annoying to them. So they get this idea of the Japanese just trying to write this off and whitewash some of this history. So it gets so close, but it's not there. So unfortunately, on the 15th, which is Liberation Day in the US, VJ Day, national holiday here in South Korea, President Yoon gave a speech, about liberation and about moving forward and increasing cooperation with Japan and kind of normalizing the relationship. But then on the same day, a handful of cabinet ministers went to the Yasukuni Shrine in Tokyo, which is, again, that's a very, very complex issue because it has all of the war dead enshrined there or whatever, right? And back in the 1970s, they put, I don't know, it's 10, 11, 12 Class A war criminals, including Tojo Hideki, in that shrine, right? And the problem is the museum that's next to the shrine. I've been there a couple of times. It's a really fabulous museum. The early part, you look at the artifacts and the history of samurai and warfare and all of that. But you get to the modern era and it has this revisionist overtone. So part of this, extreme right wing in Japan has this revisionist perception or this revisionist agenda to completely rewrite the end of the war terms, right? The whole San Francisco Treaty and the Constitution and all of that, right? The Pacifist Constitution, Article 9. So that's very aggravating, to Koreans and to others. But most Americans don't see it or they don't care. It's like, well, we won the war and we imposed our will. But for South Koreans, Chinese, and others in East Asia, when a cabinet minister goes to that shrine, it triggers this immediate outrage, and that's why. So, liberal Democrat would argue that there's certainly every right to have that kind of museum, as a private entity, right? And for people to visit it or whatever. But when a government official goes and pays, a visit there in an official capacity, it's giving some government sanction or approval. So that's the problem that, I have personally, that Koreans and others will have. So unfortunately, that happened on the 15th, the same day that Yoon was giving this speech to reconcile and move forward with Japan. I think it'll be managed and will, blow over. But these are the kind of constant things that are, cropping up in the relationship.